Every organization says it wants to grow leaders from within. Very few know how to do that. And the people who do know, they're usually too busy doing the work to talk about it. So I decided to talk to them. Hi, I'm Gosia Sita, and this is What Works in Leadership Development, the place where we skip the buzzwords and ask one simple question: what actually works? Today, I'm speaking with someone who has shaped how lawyers and leaders learn across Europe for more than 2 decades. My guest is Andy Nathan, Europe Talent Manager at Dentons, an EMCC-accredited coach, and one of the most human-centered facilitators that I know. He's British, but almost 30 years ago, he moved to my home country, Poland, and this was not the cool Instagram-worthy Poland that you see today. This was the gray, post-communist, we are still figuring things out Poland. Somehow he came and looked around and thought, yeah, this is where I'm staying. So today we are talking about what he's learned from developing talent across cultures and what really helps people grow as leaders. Hi, Andy. I'm really,
Hey,
really
gosh.
happy to see you and have you today.
I just want to say it was worth it to hear myself spoken about in the third person.
It's
Yeah,
one of the most important things in communication, right? To set things up properly. So I'm
agreed.
glad that it worked for you. So my first question comes out from curiosity. Why Poland? You built your whole life and career in Poland. What brought you there originally? And then what made you stay there?
I mean, the first part's maybe a bit underwhelming. I made a decision in my early 20s that I didn't just want to watch the world on TV, and 2 week holidays abroad wasn't enough for me. So I decided that I wanted to spend maybe 2, 3 years experiencing what it means to live abroad and learn a culture. And so that was the first thing. The second thing was, why Poland? Well, never having lived anywhere and not really having any preconceptions about what life might be in any particular foreign country, I decided that I would send my CV out to a bunch of agencies and take the first reasonable looking job wherever it was. And the first reasonable looking job was in Warsaw.
Amazing.
Yeah. How did I get here? And the piece around how is it that I'm still here 29 and a half years later?
Oh, is that
Because
that long?
with a 1 year break living in Prague,
Uh-huh.
the answer to that is, I think it's connected to my growing up, because as a child, we moved around a lot with my dad's work. So we lived in the town where I was born for a year, and the next town for two, and then the next for 10, and the next for 2 and 3, and so on. So I think that what happened to me is, after 3 years living in Warsaw, I had three different directions. I was at this amazing moment in my life when I had three really good looking job offers. And I thought about them and I thought, well, I've been here 3 years and I'm really happy. And I feel like the old thing about a rolling stone gathers no moss. I thought I can always move on, but I'm just curious what it will be like to deepen my experience, not just in the place, but primarily with the people. I had this craving for a deeper sense of connection with people that I'd started to get to know and I liked. And I was also inspired by this Polish concept that you've got different words for friend in Polish. One of the words is przyjaciół, isn't it? The idea of przyjaciół is it's a close friend. And there's this very much embedded in that is the idea that you can't be one of those people. You can't be a close friend without some years of connection to deepen that and make it meaningful. So I think that's really what it was about, the desire for some depth of connection to people and place.
It takes a while for us to warm up to people we don't know, but when you get to know us, we make really good friends. I'm glad you stayed because this is how and where we met. We met in Poland all those years ago when you were the founder of a translation consultancy that I worked in and with. So, what made you want to transition to leadership development or training?
I mean, that implies a degree of intentionality that simply wasn't present in my life. One of the things that now I'm 54, I've had many moments where you look back at these, the round numbers, don't you? You reach 40 and you look back, and you reach 50 and you look back, and you get a puppy, as I did this week. I think it's just curiosity driven. I stayed in Poland because this juncture when I had these different choices. I was curious about what would my life be like if I was to deepen my connection with these people and places. I was an English teacher for several years, a business English teacher. Poland is full of remarkably good speakers of English. That's
Mm.
true now, and it was true even back in 2000, 2001. I think what I discovered is that a lot of the people that I'm ostensibly working with on language skills are pretty good with English, but it's the communication side that they needed. So I was always interested in writing. I studied English literature at university as well as sociology and economics. So I was always interested in written communication. And so the first thing was that I got into teaching people how to write effectively. And my instinct has always been around how to do things in plain language. And then from written communication went into spoken communications or public speaking. Another thing, because of the context that I was in working in different organizations, people were coming to me at certain times of the year with their annual appraisal form saying, can you help me fill this in? And filling it in always means not just filling it in, but reflecting on what you want to say
Mm.
and why do you want to say it? So that's that piece of my leadership development pathway and how am I describing it? I think it's just like this breadcrumb trail of interesting things that just led me down the path. You could not plan the pathway that I've charted through life to this point, but it's all curiosity driven, I would say.
Yes. Oftentimes we have this impression that, adults are the ones that map things out and follow a path, but sometimes things just happen and you fall into things and you stay because you love the thing that you do. I was preparing for this interview with you. I was looking at the testimonials on your LinkedIn, and there are some themes that repeat themselves and, in my view, are very important for leadership development. One thing that stands out is psychological safety. I wonder if you could share with us why creating a safe space for learning and development is so important for developing leaders, and how do you do it?
Recently, I was preparing a session around psychological safety, and I had this idea of a cloakroom with knight's armor hanging on pegs. So the idea that when we're doing this session together, we're going to leave our armor outside the room and we're going to show up as our sort of vulnerable selves. But the idea actually goes back to the late 90s when I was promoted to being assistant director of a language school. And it was a pretty dynamic time. There was a really good sales team who were very dynamic and ambitious in what they did. And I was on the pedagogical side. So my job was to, quality assurance, designing programs, supporting teachers. So I was always careful and caring about delivering good quality. On the one hand, you have the team that's there to sell and make promises. And I don't want to say it was the Wild East back then, but it was the Wild East maybe. And so there was sometimes conflict in the management team around delivery versus quality assurance. And there was one particular week where there was a lot of tension. I remember walking up the stairs of the office and having this feeling that there's another day of conflict coming. And I just visualized as I walked up each step, I visualized myself putting on pieces of armor and preparing myself for battle. And that stuck with me. And that image of protecting ourselves. And then the other thing about coming to work, years later, I had this thought that when people are feeling safe in teams, when there's something difficult to do, when there's a new project and we're challenged, do we walk more quickly to the office? In other words, if we've got something that's difficult to do and we're in a team where there is psychological safety, we bring curiosity, excitement, and enthusiasm. What am I going to learn through this? So I have this idea that we'll walk a bit quicker because we want to get where we're going. But in a place like I worked at, where I was imagining putting on a suit of armor, I sort of had this feeling that most likely I was slowing down as I was getting to the door of the office. So I had that sense that psychological safety means that you almost want to run towards your work because you're excited by it. And the absence of psychological safety is that you're, a little bit like my puppy when it was raining yesterday, that I've got the leash and the puppy and it's got its paws out in front of it. and she just doesn't want to go out. And I have to do everything I can to get her to want to go outdoors. So that for me is that piece about psychological safety. Do I get excited by challenges or do I feel threatened by them?
I love this metaphor of armor. So, first of all, we work together in the legal sector, which has quite a bit of armor, I would say. Can you share some tips that you have on how to disarm people in a leadership development program and what the impact of this disarming is when it comes to outcomes of a program?
The first thing is that when we're put into a new role, one with more responsibility, one with more demanding KPIs,
Mhm,
one where we don't have expertise and good habits around the new things, it's common that we'll retreat behind a positional
mhm,
perspective. I'm thinking about this Harvard project on negotiation, this
mhm.
principled negotiation idea that a good principled negotiator will focus on interests and not positions. But I think one of the first things that happens when you change a business card from, I don't know, coordinate to team lead or from manager to director or whatever that title, or from associate to partner, whatever it is, the very first thing about that is that your title has changed and your position has changed. So I think there's a very strong anchoring effect in positional thinking. I am now X, so I should therefore behave as X. What happens then is that we move away from ourselves, we become maybe distant from our values and we're more concerned about how we look and am I credible and so on. So it's much more positional thinking and positional mindset in these programs. Part of it is modeling. And when I say modeling, I mean, if you're leading these kinds of things, the pressure is also on you as a trainer to perhaps be a little bit positional, to have
Mhm.
your persona, to be on stage. Certainly had that whole chapter in my career when I wanted to look invulnerable and confident and competent and speak without hesitation. All
Mhm.
those things I think they're very adjacent to a new leader trying on the new clothes of a leader. But now I think I'm really mindful of modeling, showing up as me. Uh, and,
Absolutely.
and that's around this idea. It's not about me, it's about them. So whenever I find myself, if I've got a big event or a new course or something that makes me nervous, I always go through this process of checking my own feelings. Maybe I'll do a little bit of meditation, close my eyes, a bit of breathing. I'm wanting to settle so that I can remember and keep in mind that it's not about how I feel and will I do a good job and how will it go, but how are they feeling in this moment? So for me, there's two pieces of that. One is that I'm embodying it and modeling it as a trainer. And the other is that I'm trying to bring this across in the training context as well, in the activities that we do. So, just some really easy examples, coming back to negotiation skills. A confident negotiator is not worrying about how they're doing. They're curious about how the other person's interests look. Because if I can really understand you, I can find common ground. So as a negotiator, you'll be curious about the other. In terms of client work, I love the book, The Trusted Advisor, the David Maister and so
Mhm.
on, and the trust equation. And a lot of people think about the trust equation purely in the context of their clients. But why could we not turn that lens round and look at it, how we are vis-a-vis our colleagues and so on? Focus on interests, not positions. Focus on listening and curiosity, this idea of ask, not tell. Any training we're doing, I mean, of course, some listeners might challenge that if they've been in the room with me, but I think the aspiration is to frame training around asking first and creating an environment through contracting where people feel safe to ask questions. I mean, no stupid questions is an easy thing to say, but you really need to be intentional about creating an environment when people feel that it's true. Not only sharing questions, but feeling safe to speak up. I do a lot of online training, and one of the things that we do is always say, if you want us to pause the recording, if you've got a point that you'd like to make or a question, and you don't
Love
want it to be on
that.
the record, we can pause it and deal with it offline. Some sessions we simply don't record them at all. So right from the beginning, we say, we're not going to record this because we want a meaningful conversation and we don't want you second guessing what's appropriate to say and what's appropriate to ask because you feel that it's on the record. So for me, that's another thing. It's all really around meaningful engagement with deeper listening, curiosity about people's interests and not their positions. asking, not telling. But there's two other things I would add, though. One is that as a trainer, after so many years of working on my public speaking skills, learning how to be cohesive, coherent, impactful, authentic, not trying to be impressive, I've also realized that whatever I say will be much more persuasive if it comes out of the mouth of a colleague or a peer or a leader within that space. So I'm really keen on inviting guests into training to speak to the cohort from their perspective. And I'm also really keen on creating space for peers within these sessions to talk to each other. That means that sometimes I won't get to share something new, but the sincerity and intensity of the peer conversations is often more valuable than anything I can say that people could find on YouTube afterwards anyway. It's a long answer to a short question.
I know that's a very insightful answer to my question, and there are a couple of things I would love to unpick in your answer. First, I really like how you phrased the reason why people arrive to training sessions, some of them wearing very heavy armor, and that absolutely has to do with a new role that they are in or aspire to. So they want to be seen in a certain way. We all do. Another layer is the high stakes in the legal industry that make people put up their guard. And it's sometimes scary for the trainer because you arrive to a room of people you can't quite read, people who take quite a bit of time to warm up, and you do it beautifully. Something that I learned from you is more of a coaching approach to training, where you are not very prescriptive in what you do with people in the training room. You do have a plan, but you are very good at spotting what people need and running with it, sometimes at the expense of this is my training outline. But this cost is, I think, worth bearing because it gives people more value because it responds to what they actually need from you and from the training.
There's so many things to unpick in what you've said, actually, but one thing that comes to mind is this. It comes back to this thing about whether you're a new leader or whether you're a trainer. Because as a trainer, you're leading the group. If they don't want to go with you, you're going to achieve nothing. It's this focus on the facade that they bring with them. I mean, look, no client wants a lawyer that doesn't appear self-assured. If you're worried about whether or not, if you've got a legal dispute and you're stressed, you don't want a lawyer to say, I'm really worried too. What you want is somebody who feels in control, so that if you're having trouble sleeping at night, you can think, okay, my lawyer's got this. In professions like the legal profession, there's a lot about learning to project confidence in a room and invulnerability even. Now, that creates a lot of fragility, doesn't it? Because if you're new to the profession, you're a trainee, or you're new to your role, you've just been promoted to whatever senior associate counsel partner, then there's that sense of people's expectations towards you. It's very natural to be concerned about whether you expose your lack of knowledge.
I think there is a balance to be had in terms of how leaders present themselves, even in high pressure, high stakes industries, because I think we overestimate how important it is to present authority and confidence and underestimate how important it is to present yourself as a human being.
One of my favorite books is Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow.
Mm.
And he talks about this sort of substitution effect. If I ask you a hard question, you'll find an adjacent easy question. For example, imagine I have a headache and I go to a neurologist. I have no knowledge of neurology.
Mm.
I can't judge the doctor on his or her technical knowledge. So I will judge the next best thing, how they seem with me. Do they have a good bedside manner? Do I feel safe? Do I feel heard? This substitution effect is interesting, isn't it? Because when you go to a lawyer and you're looking for help, if you're going to a certain level of lawyers, let's say, if you're even a qualified lawyer, wherever they are, you're going there with an assumption that A, they know the law, and B, they can help you with that. So what are you really going to be looking at? Most of us are going to be looking at how they are with us. Are they empathetic? Do they listen? Do they put space there? Do they sort of lean back and steeple their fingers and opine and try to be impressive?
Absolutely.
Because that's old school professions in general, isn't it? This is very much a Polish thing, isn't it? Like you're going to the doctor. This deference to
Different.
professionals that we used to have across the different professions, and now it's much more of a service provider mindset. We don't have the ability to judge the specialists that give us the
Yeah,
help, but we do judge them on how we feel with them.
absolutely. When you create this sense of psychological safety in the training room, how does it affect their behaviors as leaders? Does it change the way they present themselves as leaders? Is the way people present themselves as leaders in the legal sector changing? And is there more balance between this authority and warmth, openness, and authenticity?
I mean, there's definitely a generational change anyway, regardless of anything that I might be doing. I think that people are much more aware now of the importance of feeling happy at work. And I think the younger generation of leaders, let's say partners, people who are being promoted to partner in their I don't know, early 30s, mid 30s, early 40s, I think there's much more commonly an aspiration to have a happy team.
Mm,
It could also just be pragmatism that if you have an unhappy team, they'll leave and you'll be continually retraining new people and you'll burn out. But there is that generational shift towards wanting a more meaningful life in general and
mm.
happiness at work. I mean, I can only go on what I'm told by the people that we're training. It's anecdotal. First thing that comes to mind is openness to feedback and curiosity. The beginning of these different development programs that we run a 360-degree feedback process. For many people, it's the first time they've asked somebody who's not their boss for feedback. So there's that sense of interest in it. I think, in fact, the most common insight from the 360s is that people assess themselves more critically than their colleagues do because there's so much perfectionism around.
Mm.
People set themselves a very high bar to reach. I think it's liberating to find out that colleagues from across your organization actually see you perhaps more positively than you see yourself. But then a big part of this work is on feedback in itself. So we do workshops on giving and receiving feedback. And we also do a lot around emotional intelligence and being aware of our emotions and working with them. So when I read the final reports from people who've been through the programs, it's fairly frequent that people will talk about how they have more actively sought feedback. It's more natural that you might seek feedback from your supervisor anyway, but to be looking for feedback from junior members of your team,
Mm.
to be asking clients for feedback too. Ultimately, the aspiration to keep clients happy is very different from knowing how you're keeping clients happy. So that curiosity coming into the conversation saying, look, I really appreciate this relationship. I'm very grateful to be working with you. I'm doing a lot of things to keep you happy, but I'm really curious about what you feel you're getting from this relationship. I think feedback is a really good bellwether for the culture in a team because we know we can talk about it and everybody knows things like the feedback sandwich and these different techniques, but actually it's not about the techniques, it's about the underlying intention behind the request for feedback as well.
And it's a request for feedback. Yeah, we should be asking for feedback more rather than get it once a year or only when we don't do a good job.
I'm noticing, Gosha, that a theme that's coming out of this conversation is this idea of ask, not tell.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a
Yeah.
focus on other people, be it clients or team members. The most successful programs that you've run, and you've run quite a few that resulted in people staying in the firm, progressing to more senior leadership positions, and becoming better leaders. How do you shape leadership development programs to get the results that I just mentioned?
Well, I mean, first of all, I've been told by my mentor that I need to be better at self promotion. But I must say, the fact that people have come through the programs and they have stayed or they've been promoted, I'm very cautious about the idea of causation versus correlation. So I would really love to think that what you said is true, that people stay because of the programs and they get promoted because of the programs. I think my mindset is very much that people come with a lot of thoughts of their own and a lot of experience. I'd rather peers were sharing with each other than that they were necessarily listening to me. So it's The wisest person in the room is the room. The role of the program is to bring people together to share so that it's not about me or the trainers, it's about them together. So everything that we're doing is asking how can we connect them better? So contracting, and that's a coaching thing too, isn't it? Of course. So contracting, I think self-disclosure is important. You talk about the feedback that I've asked for and I've received. Very often it's about the fact that I'm sharing stories of my challenges. So that contracting, self-disclosure, simply giving time and space. Because I think as trainers, we're very often content driven and we want to get the content
Yeah, tell me
across. And I
about.
think that the framing of the outcomes, if my main primary outcome is by the end of this session, I want people to know about X, I can send them something to read. So I'm trying to think about outcomes which are more about not just the techniques, because if somebody is interested and motivated to learn something, they'll find out for themselves. This might sound a bit woolly and soft, but I much more want to open people up. That idea about putting the armor on the peg outside the
Mhm.
room and coming in with a sense that I'm safe. I can think about what I'm going to learn instead of am I going to expose my ignorance or am I going to look silly? So I think that's the primary thing, whatever the context, whether it's a workshop where it's about role playing or a discussion group so that people can get their hands dirty with some concepts or some other form of session. It's always about creating a space where we're very clear that what we really want is them to be sharing. There's the two dimensions of modeling, isn't there? One is how we lead a session and model how we are. And this is very much a hope, and it's not proven that having experienced that type of facilitation within a training context, people take that into their team meetings. Having had richer, more meaningful conversations with peers in these programs makes people more curious about what they're going to learn from their colleagues, outside the programs too.
Yeah, absolutely. Eating a community is, for me as well, always one of the goals for training, any kind of training, because a lot of peer learning comes out of it. A lot of psychological safety comes out of it. I would add to it practice during the sessions, which you do, but you didn't mention, is something that results in a change in behavior. Because telling or getting people to read something is not going to change the behavior, is it?
It's like having driving lessons, isn't it? And then having a theory session of your driving
Absolutely.
course and never getting behind the wheel of a car. It's like when we talk about feedback conversations, we do these sessions. Sometimes people feel a bit reluctant to engage in an actual role play of a feedback conversation. It's very different talking about how you would approach something than actually doing it. How do you encourage people to engage with role play, which is a completely different kind of thing to what they do on a daily basis, so that they can actually experience what comes out of their mouths and not what they would hypothetically say, how the person responds and how they feel in that interaction. That's the experiential piece.
That's the way I'm trying to deal with it because I hate random role plays. Like the rest of us, is to get people to bring their own work life scenarios and use those as the basis for a role play. And then there is this piece where you are wondering, okay, how do I make it safe? I can put them into breakout rooms. I can put them in pairs. Or maybe if I'm lucky, I get a raging extrovert and I can do a demo in front of everyone else.
There's big difference between helping people facilitating a role play and facilitating a simulation. I used to be a control freak as a trainer. I often thought I should be doing role plays, but I'm afraid of doing them. I've just clarified what I own and what they own now. If I can
Hmm.
facilitate an opportunity to practice something, then I'm not responsible for if somebody really doesn't want to show up for that. I've got to train myself to do it as best I can. But then when preparing a simulation, people are playing themselves and they own the scenario. If I'm creating a role play, I've really got to, there's not that many scenario situations when I feel comfortable making a role play because I don't necessarily have enough experience. I can role play client conversations from both sides because I've been the client of lawyers and I've been selling myself or my business to clients. So I can create role plays around that very easily, but I can't recreate a lot of the scenarios that my cohorts that I work with have because I've not walked in their shoes. So I think a simulation is a much better formula because you create a framework where you can ask them, what's the situation? Where are you? What are your interests? What do you think theirs are? And they simply build it and it's real for them.
Realized that I was using the wrong word for what I do. It's a simulation, not role play. You live, you learn. People respond better as simulation. That's the word I'm going to use from now on, because the moment you say uh, the word role play, everybody just freezes.
People roll their eyes and fold their arms.
So yeah, you gave us a lot of great tips for what's happening in the training room. Looking at the successful programs that you've run from the bird's eye view, I've noticed that what you do at Dentons is create very comprehensive leadership programs where there is this training component, there is coaching component, there is peer learning, there is a lot of moving parts. Some of them I probably am not aware of as an external trainer. So can you tell us a little bit about those moving parts and how they affect the final outcome of a successful program? She on the spot.
I'm thinking back to when I was in that language school that I mentioned at the beginning, and
Yeah.
if one of the teachers came up to me and said, "Andy, the trouble with you is I ask you the time and you tell me how to build a watch." I mean, the thing is that it comes back to that emotional piece again, doesn't it? I mean, people show up for training and they're expecting, especially professionals, continuous development training. It's an eternal journey, isn't it? But I think that a lot of people that show up in professional services firms for training, they're expecting knowledge-based training
Mhm.
where you can show up and you can sit for an hour and listen, and it's not necessarily engaging, but you have to do it.
Mhm.
People are showing up in a very cognitive state, maybe even disembodied. I sometimes think of the brain of a professional as a bit like it's in a shopping trolley. So the body is just a delivery system for the brain. But what we really need for behavioral change is some emotional open. Psychological safety is part of it, but it's not enough. I think what we've got to do is connect what we're doing from a training perspective with people's values. One of the challenges with values is that for people who've not had the opportunity to be coached or to go through some kind of a development program, the values will be very much implicit. And if you ask somebody what their values are, a lot of people won't have an answer. Or if they do have an answer, they'll have a pat answer. It'll be, I want to be perceived as a professional. I want to be perceived as competent. I want to be perceived as hardworking. I mean, this is a little bit like going to a car dealer and saying, I'd like a car. What I'm really looking for is something with four-wheel seats and an engine. You know, they're simply not differentiators for anybody. So I think that there's an element of challenge there. What I'm really looking for is uh, creating an awareness of these are my values and this is what I want for myself in some deeper way. And it doesn't resonate with everybody, but if I know what my values are and I know the kind of atmosphere I want to build for my team, and I know what success looks like for me, and that's a coaching question, isn't it? What does success look like? You look 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, and what do you want to build for yourself and for others? Giving people that sort of North Star or the compass I mentioned earlier, it makes it much easier for them to engage with training because the training becomes a means to their personal end. The same as the role play in a simulation, isn't it? If we're doing leadership training where you're simply giving people competencies and telling them how certain things are done by leaders, then that's very much the role play positions, not interests thing. But when you dive into articulating your values and vision, giving yourself that compass to guide you, then people are starting to implicitly ask that question. What are my skills now? What are my strengths now? And what are my blind spots? So I think there's a lot more open to go through a program if you've asked yourself that why at the beginning.
I think what works really well in your programs and in any successful programs is creating the right environment for learning and growth. The environment that then spills over to other areas, other teams, other people. And I've seen that with it in one of the development programs where you created this community feel and psychological safety. People started doing things that senior leaders always wanted them to do. So connecting across functions, connecting across regions, connecting across countries, setting up coffee mornings online to see how they can support each other or recommend each other to clients. So I think that's a good question to ask yourself when you create a leadership development program. How can I create this environment to help people grow and develop? You work across countries in Europe with people who are non-native English speakers, right? Have you seen any specific challenges people face when they're trying to advance in the organization? And if so, how did you handle those challenges?
You were a translator, I was a language teacher, and there are so many lenses to apply to the question, where to begin?
As a non-native speaker, I have a
Mm,
suggestion. There's always this thought at the back of our heads when we speak in a foreign language.
mm,
Oh, I sound so much smarter, so much funnier in my own language.
mm,
I'm not as articulate in English as I am in my own language. Are the people gonna take me seriously when I speak
yeah.
with an accent or mess up the grammar or use the wrong word?
This is a really tough one because the politically correct answer is, well, maybe I'm not going to give you the politically correct answer. I'm going to give you the politically incorrect answer because years ago, I was approached by a partner in another firm that I was working with, called me and said, look, this person is going to have their partnership interview. He's on the panel for this. He says, look, I've met this person and I understand their mother tongue a little bit. And when they speak their mother tongue, they sound really impressive. But when they speak English, they just don't. So what can we do to help this person? I mean, that's such a multi-layered answer, and there isn't a single one. One of them is, of course, help them be more fluent. But the other thing is that if you're accustomed to judging people because they speak accented English, there's nothing I can do to help somebody overcome your prejudice, your bias. This comes up a lot in public speaking training with non-natives, and I'm acutely aware that I have a privilege that I am a native English speaker. The caveat is that as somebody who's lived in Poland a long time, I have done business presentations in Polish. Last year, for the first time ever, I was invited to co-lead a full-day training in Polish, and it was so cognitively demanding. It was exhausting. So I've walked those shoes. For me, it's like this. Most people that we work with have empathy. Of course, there are psychopaths that in all walks of life, but when I'm showing up as myself, I'm interested in getting to the people that I resonate with. I always say that I'm not vanilla ice cream, I'm more Tabasco. I'm okay with not everybody loving me, but I'd rather that I'd rather that I resonate meaningfully with some people than that I'm just okay for everybody. So in this context of public speaking, if I'm working with people who really struggle, maybe with word choice and there's a lot of
Mhm.
hesitation, for example, then it's like, look, you're in the room because of your expertise and not because of your language competence. That's the first thing. So it's simply not about your language. If an audience, whether it's in a meeting or a big auditorium, if the audience sees that you're prepared, that you're purposeful, intentional, that you're doing your best to address their interests, they'll forgive a lot in terms of hesitation, picking the wrong word, stopping and going, oh, what's the word? People will just go, yeah, 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 come on, tell me the rest of the story. Most people are pretty empathetic to those challenges, even if they're not speaking a foreign language themselves. And the ones that are not empathetic, I'm just learning to disregard them, to be honest. I don't want to resonate with people that don't have empathy for people who've got real challenges.
I
And to perform at a high level under pressure in a foreign language, that's something that a lot of native English speakers just never have to do.
There is a reason why non-native English speakers are worried about how they are going to be perceived based off of how they sound, because it's more difficult to process accented English, whether the accent is foreign or regional. And when we can't make sense of what someone is saying, we
Mm.
normally deal with this by blaming the other person.
It's the substitution
Yeah.
effect again,
Yeah.
isn't it? The hard question is how difficult it must have been for this person to learn English to the level when they're
Yeah.
standing on a stage and
Absolutely.
speaking to me, not in their mother tongue. The easy question is they don't speak English well, so are they credible to me?
I think
Um,
what you said earlier is so valuable that it's not about the accent, it's not about perfect wording, it's about the value you bring, your expertise, your experience, your knowledge. And this is something that non-native English speakers should be hearing more often, especially when they are in this vulnerable place where they are just about to become people leaders.
this is true. I mean, there is a language competence matter. It is important to have a growth mindset. It's important to be goal driven in communication. We're going off at a slight tangent from leadership into language competence, but for everything we do, there's a certain level of expertise that we need. Now, there are certain roles where it's okay to be an intermediate level of speaker in a foreign language because you're not dealing with very granular ideas and nuances, perhaps. On the other hand, if that's your career objective, for example, to be a partner in an international law firm, professional services firm, then I think that you've really got to be planning not just to build on your hard skills, but to be learning how to be nuanced in communication.
Absolutely.
And so
Not saying you shouldn't learn English.
another thing that came up earlier on was perfectionism. And I want this to be perfect is really quite disempowering because what's perfect? It's very hard. What I'm trying to do in the coaching context is encourage people to adopt this idea of what is fit for purpose. If I say this presentation, this document, my English, my Polish is fit for purpose, it allows me to iterate a set of points, a checklist. Can I do this? Or does the document do this? Does my presentation do this? Does my Polish, my English do this? Can I say that? And then I can work point by point through that and build the sub-competencies there.
Focus on that
So
rather than your fears of what do people make of me.
exactly.
Wrapping things up, first of all, thanks for so many valuable insights and tips. I wonder how you see the future of leadership development now that AI is firmly in place in the workplace. What's going to change in the way we develop leaders?
The obvious thing that's happening for me is we're needing to be a lot more clear and intentional about who does what or what does what. That expertise and access to encyclopedic knowledge, that's a technology problem now. The thing that's really going on is the human problem. In the coaching space, for example, if the only problem a coachee has is how to work the problem from a cognitive perspective. So I know I want to do this. I don't have an issue with my motivation. I don't have limiting beliefs. I just want to work through how I need to plan this. Then I think an AI is a really good sparring partner for that. It can help you make a business plan. It can help you prepare for a meeting, a presentation, and so on. These are all issues around expertise. I think at the point when it's about limiting beliefs, how do I overcome this perfectionism? I'm struggling with burnout, or I want to be a better leader. I think you find the resources to become a better leader by looking within you to begin with, and then out the resources to manifest your values. I think those conversations are ones that it's much better to have with a human being.
What
I
does
think the
it mean
same with
to
just,
us as talent development professionals? What do you think is going to change for us? What is changing for us already?
I mean, there's a lot of difficult things about AI that people are talking about, sort of cognitive deficit from the laziness that comes from using AI to do things. At the moment, I'm preferring to focus on what it allows me to do differently and better. I can design a bespoke training session now for a particular group of people based on their specialization and even possibly their age, cultural background. And I can do that in hours. In the past, it just simply wouldn't have been possible because it would have been days or weeks' work. So I think that we can be a lot more, we can create a lot more bespoke experiences and content. I'm a big fan of Notebook LM, for example. As a research tool, I can fairly quickly collate a credible bibliography of sources, and I can then use Notebook LM to help me digest that. And again, it's speeding up the process a lot there. I mean, long term, it's going to replace everybody, is it? I don't know.
I'm just about to say that you reassured me that robots are not going to replace us. And so you end your reflection.
Yeah, I mean, one of our roles is to help bring into focus the human skills that people need and help them sharpen those. and be clear about where AI can help us and even should help us, and where we take responsibility for ourselves and
Mm,
we don't simply push off
delegate.
onto AI the deeper work that we do. I think that, augmenting our expertise is really cool with AI. Replacing our expertise is a bit less cool because we're not in a position to judge the quality of what it's producing.
Linked to this question is another one left by my previous interviewee, who was curious how you use AI right now for leadership development, not just AI, technology in general.
Makes me think about a conversation I had with a head of innovation years ago, and she would say innovation doesn't need to be technology based. It's something new that creates value. I think there's a fixation on technology. Of course, we can create e-learning much, much faster. We can use it to ideate instructional design much faster and better. I've got blind spots around instructional design, and I know from using GPT-5 or our in-house tools that it can help address my blind spots in, for example, designing simulations. On the other hand, a lot of the innovation is these insights around emotionally intelligent leadership and how can we cultivate that. And that's very human.
I'm not going to ask you to summarize, but I'm going to ask you to share 3 top tips for people in charge of leadership development in their company. I just had a conversation with someone who wants to create a leadership development program from scratch for her own organization. She's a little bit lost at this point because she didn't realize how much work goes into it. It's not a big organization, but it's an organization that wants to have a leadership program and leadership track for their talent. So, top tips for a person like this.
It's a difficult question to answer because I think a lot of people that would be interested in the answer would have so much of their own points of view and experience. What I would say is that if you've got limited resources, the best thing that you can do is create safe spaces for people to share with each other and therefore ask, not tell. So that's the first one. The second one is to be curious about the values, wants, and needs of the people you're going to be working with. And I say that because when you're in this profession, I mean, if you're a development professional or a coach, anybody who's interested in development, you're probably a lifetime learner. You're probably curious about learning for its own sake. And you probably think that connection and emotional intelligence are important, but you won't work with people who believe those things necessarily. You might work with people who are very ambitious and KPI oriented. It's the same as with good public speaking. You need to understand their what's in it for me. So you need to be careful not to use your own language to describe things in a way that excites you, but leaves the audience cold.
And the third best tip for developing good leadership development programs or interventions.
Here's one.
Mm.
Bringing people in to support the program is not asking for a favor. The classic thing is that you want to run a session on, let's say, negotiation or client development, and you're thinking, who in the organization is really good at this? Or, who do we respect? Or who's well known for that? And then reaching out to that person in this slightly pleady way of, I was wondering if you would be able to help us with this. And actually, that's probably how I used to be. But now I'm really keen on the what's in it for me. If we're inviting a leader to a session with future leaders, we're giving them space to develop a whole new cohort in their collaboration community. So not thinking of asking people into the program as asking for favors, think of it as being an enabler for the guest as well as for the participants. Maybe that's the last one.
Amazing. I'm really tempted to ask you one more question. Can I?
Stop.
How do you get buy-in? What's your best tip for getting a buy-in for an intervention that you know is needed and people are like, I'm not sure, or I'm not sure if there's a budget for it? How do you get people on board?
Make sure that you formulate the problem in a way that resonates with them. Just make a clear distinction in your mind about the difference between what people want and expect and what they need. Change the frame. I'm thinking about a book I read years ago called The Challenger Sale. It was recommended to me by a finance lawyer. I really like the book because it's got this idea of expert as educator. And the moment when a client or stakeholder says, oh, wow, you really understand the business, that feels like a breakthrough moment for you, but it's not because they already think they understand the business. So you're giving them nothing new. The moment when they turn around and say, you know, I've never thought about it from that perspective before, or I've never heard that point of view before, that's the moment when people feel like you're giving them something that they don't have. So for me, that's a key piece. And the last thing is simply that you win some and you lose some. You know, some of the ideas that you get so excited about, you're losing sleep over because you just want to pitch it, and it falls flat because there's no budget, or it's the wrong time, or the organization has different priorities. And don't take it personally and keep going.
Excitement is a dangerous state for me because when I am excited, I can sometimes forget that it's not about me, it's about that person and framing the ask from their perspective. Why is it important for you?
It's true, Gosha, what you said, but one of the things that people have always said that they appreciate about me is how enthusiastic I am. So, you know, if I'm going to frame it in language that might suit the stakeholder I'm communicating with, but I don't feel enthused by it, then I'm not going to do the best job of selling it. So I think that I need to stay in touch with my enthusiasm.
No balance. Yeah. So one last thing, what's your question to the next interviewee? What are you curious about when it comes to leadership development in other organizations, in other industries? What would you like to learn?
What's the last thing that inspired them?
Ooh, deep and very you. Thank you so much for your insights and for this reminder that really leadership development works best when it's deeply human. Thank you very much again, Andy. And for those of you who are listening, especially when you work in global teams or trying to build confidence in your people, including those people who don't speak English as their first language, I'd love to hear what resonated with you and what's worked in your organization. Thank you so much and goodbye.
Thanks for the chat, Gosha. Yes.